Abolish Rent: How Tenants Can Solve the Housing Crisis by Tracy Rosenthal and Leonardo Vilchis. Published by Haymarket Books in 2024. Introduction. The two authors of this book spent July 4th delighting in the collective disobedience of hundreds of thousands of people across Los Angeles. On Leonardo's roof, while Tracy cheered at each blast, we watched as each gathering of friends and family knit their own fireworks into the broad sheet of LA sky. Together, these explosions coalesced into hours of lights and sound, which dogs hate and children love. From our perch in Boyle Heights, we toasted not to patriotism, but to possibility. It is already possible to defy the law, upend the social order, and participate in mass collective action. Maybe this is what it would take to ensure that everyone in our city had a home. Los Angeles often shows us the future of the whole country. As the United States incorporated LA's territory, annexing Mexico and ethnically cleansing the Tongva people, for whom the land was home for several thousand years, the city innovated legal settlement and subjugation. More than half a century before land values became a central business of urban centers everywhere, LA's boosters were divvying downtown parcels to flip, inspiring a literary and film genre, noir, to describe real estate's political influence. Already by the 1950s, Los Angeles imprisoned more people than any other city in the world, which itself imprisoned more people than any country in the world, as it still does today. Now Los Angeles shows us the future of housing inequality should we allow our capitalist housing system to continue unabated. 2 years ago, our city boasted the world's most expensive home, a $340 million mansion, complete with 5 pools, 42 bathrooms, and a moat, while 5 unhoused tenants died on our streets each day. In 1980, LA earned the title of, quote, homeless capital of America. We still claim the largest number of unsheltered people, but perhaps Los Angeles will play the part of the future for housing revolution, for beating back exploitation and domination, for undoing the rent relation itself. The two of us might look like an odd pair, a middle-aged immigrant and a 30-something LGBT, but there is a long history of Mexicans and Jews organizing together in California. More than that, we reflect two sides of a growing constituency, tenants in the United States. Disproportionately shut out of home ownership, or included only under predatory terms, people of color and immigrants have found themselves exploited and oppressed within the U.S. property regime, shunted into the subordinate status of tenants, segregated, and subject to price gouging. But that status has expanded. Intergenerational wealth transfers rather than income have become the determining factor of access to owning a home. Millennials can count themselves the first generation whose relationship to housing has been shaped by this new American order. So it may not be surprising that in the struggle for tenant power, we'd find each other. We met in 2012 in a warehouse-turned-community gallery in Cypress Park. The space was both a symptom of and a response to a process we discussed that day, often euphemized as, quote, neighborhood change, but better known as gentrification. Alongside a small, multiracial, and generational group, we helped form School of Echoes. Our collective spent a few years listening. To stay in Echo Park, where a gang injunction meant youth of color could be jailed just for sitting together outside, to residents of Frogtown, where a new public park arrived after half of all neighborhood properties had changed hands in 3 years, to Nido Exchange in Hollywood, where harm reduction operations had to keep up with stepped-up encampment sweeps, to Unión de Vecinos, a Boyle Heights union of neighbors Leo had co-founded in 1996 to fight the demolition of more than 900 public apartments. We heard city governments announce expanded tax bases instead of services, nonprofits negotiate the terms of community defeats, lawyers offer individualistic advice, and tenants who thought there was nothing they could do. Yet we knew our capitalist housing system, to use Ursula K. Le Guin's phrase, is a, quote, human power, produced by people, not by God or by nature. Any human power, she wrote, can be changed by human beings. High rent, displacement, and homelessness are not inevitable. Rent as a social, political, and economic relationship is not inevitable. Our capitalist housing system can and must be changed. But the solidarity among its beneficiaries, landlords, developers, elected officials, the police, means we need to build equal solidarity for ourselves. In other words, we knew we couldn't fight against rent alone. School of Echoes convened the first meeting of the LA Tenants Union, LATU, in 2015, with a single gathering in Hollywood. We invited tenants from across the city to reflect on the common features of their housing conditions and what they thought it was in their reach to control. We have since grown to over 3,000 households of dues-paying members and 12 local chapters that trace the city's sprawl with our own. We have organized more than 100 tenants associations, which have won our members needed repairs, rent rollbacks, and a measure of dignity. LATU is a member-funded union. Our meetings are monolingual in Spanish or bilingual in Spanish and English, and at times interpreted in Korean and Cantonese. As we break down the shame of living in deteriorating housing we can barely afford, we build trust across racial, ethnic, linguistic, even class differences. As we mourn for those banished from our communities, we fight like hell with those who remain. In our one-party city, in our one-party state, we organize tenants as political subjects whose task it is to beat back the power of real estate and change the world. This is the first book-length engagement with the resurgent tenant movement. Slum conditions, rent gouging, and the despotic power of private landlords over tenants' access to shelter are not new conditions, but our moment gives tenant organizing new urgency. For the first time in U.S. history, in 2021, the appreciation of the median home outstripped the median salary. Just owning a home made more money than work. The rent is too damn high. Unhoused tenants face rising criminalization as more are flung into the streets. Our homes have become the catch-all for all the crises of our times: poverty, precarity, care work, crime. In 2020, a global pandemic severed millions of tenants from their incomes nearly overnight. For millions, paying rent went from onerous to impossible. Our representatives at every level of government, tasked with stopping a flood of evictions, were content with turning down the faucet. Tenants look to each other. Thousands of tenants across the country have joined a nascent effort to turn our individualized vulnerability into shared power. Our tactics, tenants associations, rent strikes, occupations, rhyme with the heyday of tenant militancy. In the Bay Area, D.C., Kansas City, Louisville, Houston, New York, and more cities throughout the country, tenants are organizing not just to win better living conditions, but to overturn the power relations that shape those conditions altogether. At the onset of the pandemic, the LA Tenants Union more than tripled in size, engaging thousands of tenants who couldn't pay rent. Our local force resonating with the international demand that all rent payments accrued during the pandemic be canceled. The inspiration for this book came from both those movements, when we thought reality had endorsed another way of living together, and when the brutality we call normal reasserted itself as the rule. The housing question is, at its center, a question about inequality. Who gets to be housed and who doesn't? Who profits from housing and who falls into poverty, paying or failing to pay the rent? It is also a question about power. Who gets to decide how we organize our cities and how we organize our lives? It is a matter of life and death. This book looks at the housing question not from the perspective of governments, who see it as a problem to be managed, nor of developers and landlords, who see it as an opportunity for predation, but of tenants, whose lives are constrained and destroyed, but also enabled and enriched by where we live. This book is both polemic and guide. It begins from the assumption that everyone deserves a safe and stable home, or the right to use public spaces they wish, simply by virtue of being alive. This is what we mean when we say housing is a human right, no different than the right to breathe the air on this earth. You are born with this right. You should not have to earn it. You should not have to work for it. For us, quote, housing is a human right, end quote, is not a slogan meant to urge us to tinker at the margins of a broken system. It is not an ideal for which we should calmly strive. Every second we live when housing is not respected as a human right is a violation. We remain stuck in this degraded world by means of exploitation and domination, by an economic system that enriches landlords by extracting wealth from tenants, by a political system that enshrines the right to private gains over public good, the right to property over the right to life. Housing as a human right has become a cliche because we continue to let the people who violate our rights off the hook. There are violators of our rights, the hoarders of space and wealth, against whom we defend our communities, and from whom we are owed the fruits of our common labor, the value of our homes and neighborhoods. The failure to provide a basic human need in the richest country in the history of the world is not an aberration of the capitalist housing system, but that system working as designed. The production of wealth for a few and misery for the many is its engine and its purpose. Another world will not simply be handed over. To overthrow the exploitation and domination of the present order will take a liberatory struggle. It is a struggle to forge new democratic structures for managing and distributing resources according to our needs. It is a struggle against those whose wealth and power is made on the backs of our demise. Those who are now the most vulnerable to the violence and injustice of our current system have the most to gain by its destruction and the creation of another way of life. We want a world without landlords and a world without rent. We want everything for everyone. This book is grounded in the concrete struggles of tenants to gain control over our housing, our cities, and our lives. That really existing movement to abolish the present state of things. First, we ground the necessity of this transformation. Chapter 1 is a polemic against rent, a power relation between landlords and tenants, an axis of class exploitation and domination, a tribute that we pay at the peril of our need and at the barrel of a gun. Chapter 2 is an abridged history of the long, quote, war on tenants, the love affair between real estate and the state. We then describe what tenants are already doing to bring ourselves closer to the world we deserve. In our individual buildings, we can contest the despotic control landlords have over our access to a home. Chapter 3 describes the successful year-long rent strike in Boyle Heights as an example and model of what tenant organizing makes possible. In our citywide unions, we can build a countervailing force to the real estate regime. Chapter 4 shows how our own union serves as a vehicle for building cultures of resistance, democratic organizations, and tenant power. In our movement's occupations of our housing and of public and common space, we can trace the outlines of rent abolition, the absence of landlords and real estate speculators, and the presence of new kinds of relationships to housing and to each other. Chapter 5 claims the horizon of our movement as a reclamation of sovereignty over shared resources in the places we inhabit. We call this a land struggle. This book would be impossible without the members of the LA Tenants Union, whose insight and whose bravery give meaning to anything we could write. We did not write to blaze a trail for their resistance. Instead, we have shaped this book in their wake. As night progressed on that 4th of July, the Los Angeles sky hazed over with smoke. We could no longer see the bursts of light emerging from South Central or Echo Park, yet we knew they persisted, continuing deep into the night, overwhelming the ability of the repressive force of cops and the law to shut them down. Yet we knew they persisted, continuing deep into the night, overwhelming the ability of the repressive force of cops and the law to shut them down. A liberatory struggle is like this. Sometimes you lose, and sometimes you lose your way. But we know the sparks are still there. We hope you read this book in community with others. Like fireworks, it's better shared. This has been the introduction to Abolish Rent, How Tenants Can Solve the Housing Crisis by Tracy Rosenthal and Leonardo Vilchis. Stay tuned for Chapter 1, where we will be reading The Rent is the Crisis.